Welcome to Strategy Talk, where the editors of Strategy Page discuss current events with a splash of history. I'm Dan Masterson, host of Strategy Talk. With me today is the editor of Strategy Page, well-known military author and game designer Jim Dunnigan. Also joining us is the associate editor of Strategy Page, columnist and author Austin Bay.
Welcome, Austin and Jim. Halloween is approaching, and I started thinking about scary things, and I'm wondering what scary things you guys see out there on the horizon with international relations. Jim?
Well, there's two categories of scary things. One are the situations we know about that could go off the rails in a bad way. And then, of course, there's the situations we don't know about. And that's a long, long list I won't even try to go into. But the ones we do know about, first of all, there's China. China is going through multiple crises at the moment. The first one is economic. And we've covered this, the mass media has covered this, the Evergrande company, it's one of the major real estate companies. They build a lot of stuff. They have $300 billion in debt, which is considered very bad debt, weak debt. And they are defaulting. They've gone through several. They defaulted on several, bonds or debt payments that come due, and apparently they're going to go through even more. China at first expressed concern. The world was wondering, are they going to try and declare Evergrande too big to fail and bail them out? But China's already been bailing out a lot of other sectors of the economy. And apparently China's decided to do the worst possible thing. They're not bailing them out, but they're saying it's not really a problem. Of course, it is a problem because the word does get out. China has this great firewall of China, which basically makes it very difficult for most Chinese to reach the outside world. But there are thousands, possibly millions of Chinese who do know how to get out without being detected and thrown in jail. And so the news is delayed a week or so before it hits the West. But the reports are there is rising unemployment because of the Chinese, because of the Evergrande, collapse. A lot of construction projects Evergrande was working on are now stopped because the Chinese government may say it's all right, but the rest of the financial system, which China does not try and coerce into, doing what they want because they know that doesn't work big time. Evergrande has no more credit. So, the thousands and thousands of workers are out of employment, and there's a lot of buildings standing empty. Now, there are already, hundreds of thousands of housing units, basically high rises and commercial units, which were built on spec by provincial officials who then lied about it. Well, those are still standing there. Pictures have gotten out, and the latest reports are most of them are still empty. And the municipalities that own them are still paying minimal fees to keep them viable. Even that's getting too expensive. But as far as Evergrande is concerned, China has other problems they really demand attention. And one is their huge energy shortage. Now, they had three things going on. One, they were going to try and cut back on coal use in order to reduce the pollution in major cities. Now, this pollution is world-class, shall we say. The worst municipal pollution in the world is in major Chinese cities, and especially Beijing, the capital. And the problem with it being so bad in Beijing is that is where you have a lot of the embassies, and you also have a lot of journalists who can have easy access, as it were, to the outside world. And they were filing story after story about how on many days they have to keep the kids inside. Basically, a lot of people are paying big money to put air filters on their homes or apartments or businesses, which increases costs. And China found this extremely embarrassing. So they started to selectively shut down, coal use on firms that were contributing the most of this pollution to the big municipal areas. Now, that's not all of China, But then they got hit with two other problems. One was unusually heavy flooding this past year, which affected a lot of the coal-producing areas. So those collieries are basically shut down or undergoing repairs. They're not producing, even if they wanted to. The second problem is they were waging a trade war with Australia, and one aspect of that was, well, they weren't ordering more raw materials, especially coal, and there were huge shipments of coal piled up, waiting in ships to be offloaded, and the Chinese were saying no. Well, now they finally said, yes, we'll pay the demurrage fees. That's the fees you got to pay the ship owners for sitting around for so long. And Australia not only won that one, but they also went in and formed this alliance with Britain and the United States, the special relationship, as it were, which enabled Britain to get a head start on building nuclear submarines and ballistic missile submarines because they had access to American technology. Now, they designed their own subs, but they bought the power plants from the United States, and they bought the missiles. They put their own warheads on them, and we're jointly basically building a new class of SSBNs, those that are missile-carrying subs, and SSNs. Now, both the United States and Britain are retiring older classes, or planning to retire older classes of ships. Now, Britain only has, I think, 8 nuclear ships, subs. 4 of them are SSNs. The Astute class, I believe, is the one that's on its way out. And then they have 4 of their SSBNs, which are also being replaced at the same time. The United States built its new Columbia-class SSBNs. And that cooperation was a lifesaver. Well, not a lifesaver, but basically it speeds up the process for Britain. We've been basically designing our new SSBNs in collaboration with them. The plans for a new sea-launched ballistic missile are also in the works, not as aggressively, and we also coordinate that with the British. Well, now the Australians were able to dump the French project to build a non-nuclear Barracuda. That's the latest French, SSN, because the French were way behind in delivering on that project, which is multi-phase. In other words, it includes allowing Australia to get technology transfer to build some of the subs. They wanted, I think, 12 subs, conventional powered, and they were just falling further and further behind. And they have a problem with their current Collins class, are getting old, and they're paying billions of dollars to refurbish all of them to extend their life, into the it's a 20, 30 or later. But that might not even be enough for them to get their nukes built in time. So the proposals are, well, we could always lease you cheap, retiring Los Angeles class subs, which have a few years left on them, and maybe 1 or 2 of the British Astute class, which will enable you to train, sailors, crews, which are hard to get. Now, that's another problem Australia has. They had problems getting enough crews, qualified crews for their Collins class subs. That's something they didn't even come up. Now, that's scary. Not so much for us. We have problems as well, although changes in the American military may make it harder to hang on to those the nuke sailors, as it were, as well as everybody else. But that's another story. But this was a major setback for China because instead of getting the Australians to kowtow, as it were, to China, they made Australia more defiant. And of course, now Australia is finding more and more Chinese spies and Chinese influence in Australia. It's getting pretty ugly for China. So China has multiple problems with their economy. They can't, even by illegally importing coal from North Korea. They had cut the illegal imports out, this officially sanctioned imports of major items. And they've restored that. And of course, now they're shipping in more food and basically distilled petroleum products, gasoline, kerosene, and what have you, into North Korea. But North Korea is basically a small player in all this. They've been running this threaten, stomp our feet, threaten all sorts of stuff for so long. It's no longer all that scary. Now, Iran is another problem they are basically, how should I put it, failing on all fronts because the hardliners took over. There are two basic factions in the Islamic Republic or religious dictatorship in Iran. The radicals, which everybody knows about, and what the Westerners often call moderates. Well, they're not moderates; they're nationalists, and they have talked about putting more emphasis on taking care of the Iranian people because there have been major uprisings all over Iran because of mismanagement, and especially after the 2015 sanction lifting accord went into effect. As sanctions were lifted and Iran could export more, the government promised that would improve the living standards. You got about half the people living in poverty in Iran. And people got angry when they realized it wasn't improving. The money was still being stolen, diverted to the IRGC for the foreign wars in Syria and Yemen and what have you. And the government said, no, these things take time. Well, then the United States looked at what was going on and said, you're in violation of the 2015 treaty. We're reinstituting all of our economic sanctions. Now, that was bad news because if the U.S. says we're sanctioning, that means anybody else who tries to violate those sanctions is in trouble. Now, Western Europe and Russia, who basically signed off on that 2015 treaty, huffed and puffed, but they found out they couldn't do much. So it got worse in Iran, and the government tried to blame it on America, on reimposed sanctions, but that isn't working. So they have a serious problem. Now, if they go ballistic, so to speak, and the uprisings, reached 1979 levels when the clergy led a rebellion against the Shah, the monarchy, you could have another rebellion, except this time nuclear weapons or nuclear material is in play. A lot of ballistic missiles, and somebody will grab those who shouldn't have control and possibly use them to trigger a retaliation that will rally the Iranian people behind him. Well, good luck with that. But anyway, that's a possibility. Korea is another problem, even though North Korea is not as big a problem as it used to be, because of the growing North Korean threats on South Korea and a 2010 outburst of violence, which North Korea denied, but there was evidence, all over the place that they did it. They sank an a South Korean corvette near the maritime border, and they fired on a island, South Korean island, and did some damage. They caused casualties, and this basically eliminated any chance of friendly diplomacy from South Korea. And the South Koreans turned to us and said, "Look, we'd like to basically drop a lot of the arms restriction features of the mutual defense treaty we signed with the United States, which basically guarantees reinforcements in case of an attack and nuclear protection, as it were, in case somebody threatened them with nukes." And lo and behold, recently the South Koreans launched a new class of conventional submarines, the Soon class, and one of its capabilities, vertical launch tubes. And they promptly launched one of their new ballistic missiles. They've since, basically built and manufactured in short time a number of missiles they were previously forbidden to have, including long-range cruise missiles, but also ballistic missiles. But they put a modified version of their working ballistic missile, which has a range of about 500 kilometers, and they launched it. They did a successful underwater launch from this new class of submarines, the KSS-3 or class, and the first 4 of those will have, I think, six vertical launch tubes, and the rest will have 10. So they're really investing in this sort of thing, and the North Koreans have nothing to counter it with, and the Chinese are in trouble too, because they have never been able to get their nuclear missile boats working. But here is South Korea, with very quiet, that these new conventional subs have AIP, air independent propulsion, which is quieter than a nuclear sub, which they can get. When they tested this new class, it could stay underwater for nearly 3 weeks. They classified exactly how much, but they said it was exceeded previous expectations, which were about 2 weeks. So, I mean, 3 weeks is long enough to stay underwater and evade detection and do all sorts of mischief, like laying mines outside Chinese ports, launching some of these ballistic missiles, even with conventional warheads. This was very embarrassing for the Chinese. So the Chinese are being hit on all levels with embarrassments, and one does not know how they're going to respond. Now, normally, China, like the traditional, the non-radical Iranian leaders, they are prudent people, fundamentally. That's how they've been, superpowers in their regions, locations for so long. But now they're being forced to, well, not being forced, but their radicals, as it were, are acting uncharacteristically rash out of desperation. And that's bad news for the Chinese because they do have nukes. They do have ICBMs. And I don't think they get desperate enough to threaten, anybody else with nukes if they have a revolution, because again, that's not in their nature. The revolution that followed Mao Zedong had basically experienced leadership to take their place, the radicals, because the Chinese don't execute people who are out of favor. They retire them or put them under house arrest for years and years. And a lot of these people were released and got right back into power and basically turned China into a free market economy, which, bingo, now they're the second largest economy in the world. But that is all threatened because they hadn't really addressed the corruption problem, which they always had, and it got worse as there was more money to steal. So China is a big question mark. And so you have, China, Iran, Korea, and of course, Europe is concerned about what's going on in the United States or what's not going on. And they are not so much angry at us, but they're concerned because they can no longer rely on their most powerful ally. And even the French are coming right out and saying, you people have gone nuts, in so many words. It sounds better in French. And it brings back for many French, the historical memory of the terror, which basically destroyed the revolution, the original French Revolution, and allowed Napoleon to come in and end the terror, which basically had people, how should I put it, using the guillotine liberally to cancel, as it were, their opponents, real or imagined. And Napoleon crowned themselves emperor. So obviously that was the end of the French Republic, although it technically still exists. And all history doesn't repeat itself, but it paraphrases itself on a regular basis. And now that's happening. And unfortunately, a lot of the scariest rephrases are occurring or are about to reoccur. And it's hard to tell how the world will handle it.
Austin, what's the scariest things for you?
Well, Dan, the scariest thing is the Cold War between the United States and China that has really been going on now for about 2 decades, maybe a little bit longer. That Cold War going hot. And I don't think that is too radical a statement to make when you look at the aggressive. I mean, it's Jim used the word prudent, talking about the way that component of Chinese leadership. But we've seen the on, off, and very calculated on aggression mode, followed by a diplomatic and verbal placation, but not really withdrawal. That's been done since 1962 in the Sino-Indian War, and the Indians are aware of that in the Himalayan region. Just slow expansion and improvement of Chinese positions to where they achieve complete dominance. That's what they're seeking, of the high ground over the main invasion routes of India. And I'm talking all along the 3,500 kilometer line of control, and that's they've been doing it, creeping aggression. We've seen that in the South China Sea. You could really witness that from the late 1970s when China took several islands from North Vietnam. Even took one from South Vietnam before South Vietnam fell, if I recall correctly. But then solidifying their position there in the Paracels Islands, northern part of the South China Sea. Then moved into the Spratlys and have already taken a chunk out of the Philippines exclusive economic zone. We've talked several times about the 2016 Hague Arbitration Court ruling that ratified 98%, 99% of the Philippines' complaint, even including charging China with resource theft. And they concentrated, at least in part of the decision I read, on fishing resources, but you knew the ultimate game was acquisition of what are very, very likely, I would say it's certain now because of the drilling tests, but they had seismic initially that you had natural gas, significant natural gas deposits, and some scattered but potentially productive crude oil deposits as well in the region. And you can see that, and this is something that well documented on strategy page. China's vast increase, particularly in its navy. Jim's concentrated and often on also making the points of what the Chinese have tried to do with their land forces as well. And we've seen that both the maritime and land power modernization. They've improved their forces. They not only have improved them, they have built competitive. Maybe the technology is, in fact, I don't think the technology is up to U.S. and Western standards, but it's approached good enough. This week, we've also had the fractional orbital ballistic missile demonstration that included a hypersonic glide warhead. Well, that was impressive. I don't buy some of the panic talk that I've heard on some of the major national media. I don't think CIA was totally surprised by that, and it's something that it is a demonstration of a very potent capability, but which is the point I want to make, that the Chinese have produced truly capable modern 21st century weapons. But that's just the military component of the diplomatic and economic elements. Their power cocktail for establishing hegemony in Northeast Asia, Central Asia as well. That's the Belt and Road Initiative. Which and then also global hegemony. They do want to replace the United States as the number one superpower. What they want, though, is, unlike the U.S., and I'm going to get to something that Jim alluded to a moment ago about a real scary component about the U.S. The U.S. is really an alliance leader. And despite the propaganda and a leader by quiet acclamation, I think I'll use that phrase given the amount of griping and accusations that you hear in major media. But remember, also pick up on something Jim said about the Macron and the French president worrying about U.S. liability more than worried. what China wants, China doesn't want to care about alliances. Those are all convenient. The Chinese Communist Party, and by the way, Jim's called it Wuhan virus. I prefer to call it Chinese Communist Party virus, Dan. I hope we can do that on strategy page, CCCP virus. They want their say, and they don't care about what, they really do not care about what anyone else says. It's Middle Kingdom attitude. This is back to some classical Chinese concept that they have everything and they need nothing else, and their word, their desires are determinative. Yeah, if you think I'm overdoing it, ask the countries that live around them. Start with Mongolia and South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. I'm calling a separate country. Vietnam. Ask India. Ask the Uyghurs out in Xinjiang province if that's my description was over the top. I think it's dead on. There's also just to lay it out there for the cancel culture crowd. There's an ethnic Han superiority component to it. The Han Chinese are the world's largest ethnic group by a long shot. I think the figure is, and Jim may have corrected, aren't there about 900 million, maybe a billion Han? I think that's in the zone. But China also has about 300 or 400 million minorities out of its 1.4 billion people. But there's a Han superiority complex, dare I say, racism at play, at least, and it's something that I'm not going to say that the Chinese people themselves are promoting, but I think it's being played upon by Xi Jinping. That's scary, Dan. It's scary, and it's lost in the critique, what should be a harsh critique of the Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping's leadership cadre. So China is expanding. China has provoked, frightened, virtually, and this actually, I'm coming up with something that here, the fear and provocation has produced counter reaction that I see as positive. And Jim spent some time talking about the Australian, UK, and US nuclear submarine agreement. So there's much closer cooperation now between well, I always said it really was between the Japanese maritime forces and the U.S. Navy, but closer cooperation between South Korea and Japan. Japan is already talking openly about aiding in the defense of Taiwan. That sends a message back to the Chinese Communist Party that they don't want to hear. And Vietnam, we've known for about 20, 25 years, wants to become a U.S. ally. I'm just slight note of humor. It's not humorous at all. There are lots of reasons, good reasons, for defense cooperation with Vietnam. I'll also note this is something we covered in strategy page, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago. I think it was one of the things I added to one of Jim's Korea updates. I know we discussed it, that South Korea had started some coordination, military to military, on modernizing Vietnamese forces. And it was being done by the South Koreans. And why are the South Koreans doing it? It's not because they're selling mid technology weapons to the Vietnamese. They're sending a message both to North Korea and Communist China, because one of the last things Beijing wants are modernized Vietnamese ground forces. Well, that's too bad. It's part of counter reaction. But I see the Chinese threat as real. Jim has gone through the economic issues, economic problems, economic threats domestically that China faces. I'll say they deserve them. and for many reasons, it's contradictions in their own system that the dictatorship claims to wish to address, but you're back to a pogo situation where they said that we found the enemy and the enemy is us. Their own deep corruption, and also their insistence on keeping some of the SOE state-owned enterprises operating, and they really are behemoths. China's wedded to a too big to fail. At least the senior leadership, too big to fail. They're in a too big to fail situation with some of the state-owned enterprises, and they bought extra time by getting them contracts to supposedly, build a grid and modern infrastructure in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo. How's that going? Not going well. There's even more corruption in Congo. I say that as an example. They've spent a lot of money on the Belt and Road Initiative, and it hasn't paid off in the ways they thought it would for keeping the state-owned enterprises afloat. Quick comment, though. I heard this morning. We try to stay away from immediate news, but Evergrande is claiming it's going to make a unexpected payment on its debt, but that's just rolling the problem forward a few more weeks. And who knows, as Jim was saying, that the Beijing has played that backup game in the breach for problems like this in the past. It's just that Evergrande is, as I understand it, I know Jim's got a better handle on this than I do, is really tied into a lot of the domestic infrastructure, housing issues within China. So that's China presents a multifaceted, multidimensional threat, but it's a real threat. The party knows they've got domestic issues. I also think, and this will move on to what I see as another absolutely scary issue, is I think they see that they've got an opportunity because of the dysfunctional leadership in the United States. Afghanistan is just an example of it. Questionable U.S. reliability. I've written a couple of columns about this already, about the way Taiwan has the Chinese propaganda arm telling Taiwan, see that you can't rely on the United States. The United States will buckle and run, and you're left there. You may as well just go ahead and let us absorb you peacefully. The joke is on the communists, if they had moderated themselves, they would be making tons of money, and Taiwan would be an ally. But that's an alternative history that is not in the books. Not only in the books, it's not realistic at all. They've opted for an offensive, but it's an offensive that they realize that if they don't act, time's running out. And I find that very scary because of the military capabilities that they have. Jim went through the details too of their energy issues, so they understand they're fragile. But when they sense opportunity, here's the time to go. No, what am I saying? I say within the next 2 to 4 years, maybe sooner. I'm not sure how it would be, how it would kick off. I've got scenarios and cocktails from hell, and we discuss some of them here on Strategy Page Podcast. But to move to the other scary issue, and that is U.S. reliability. Jim talked about what Macron had said, and he went on and talking about Napoleon, but also talking during the terror. And the Jacobins radicals ruled, they cancel cultured their enemies by cutting their heads off. Here in the United States, we've seen the effects of cancel culture on conservative and really moderate intellectuals, and now even some left wing, more leftist intellectuals that disagree with. They're really crypto-Marxist, which means slightly hidden Marxist philosophies, but critical race theory as one example. Or you're a terrorist if you disagree with the local school board. That's trying to cancel culture. In that case, some parents in a county in Northern Virginia. It's using media as a guillotine, but also jobs. And that's moved. They've moved from the university, definitely into government, and we see this effect on the U.S. military as well. And that's scary to see intentionally divisive training, propaganda training that undermines camaraderie, undermines unit cohesion, destroys morale. And understand that I heard something that Jim said that about difficulty of holding on to nuclear trained personnel in the U.S. Navy. Why would they leave? They feel underappreciated, underpaid, and the corrosiveness on morale, bad leadership. That's at a personal level, but you see it as a systemic problem. And now what Macron was expressing grave concern about was the Biden bug out from Afghanistan, which was a debacle. We've already discussed it a couple of times on Strategy Page podcasts. Even more blunt was Boris Johnson. I'm not going to quote him directly. We don't do that on Strategy Talk. I don't have anything in front of me at all except the Skype messages. But he was astounded at the lack of coordination with allies, particularly major allies, and by that he meant the United Kingdom and France. But not just the Great Britain and France. We had really about, let's see, if the figure is I'll just say 20. We'll say 24 allies that were involved in to a greater or lesser degree in Afghanistan, including the Norwegians and also India. India had put a lot of effort at the non-governmental organization level because they understood that it was the Pakistani Inter-Service Intelligence, who's their primary active enemy, was really the controlling enemy force in Afghanistan. And here we are, the Quad, which is Japan, Australia, the U.S., and India. India's at least from, I'll say, 2015, 2016, end of Obama administration, but definitely during the Trump administration, more a functional, not outright, but functional ally of Japan, Australia, and the United States in terms of training, naval training, and at the secondary diplomatic level, and that's part because of the threat of China that India perceives, in the Himalayas, but also with the way that port of Gadar in Pakistan. It's essentially a Chinese naval base. Well, here's the U.S. with America. We're the masters of non-combatant evacuation operations, bar none. And it's a disorganized catastrophe. and the administration thinks it's done a good job. What planet are you guys on? Everybody else sees the debacle. And all right, I wouldn't go into leaving U.S. citizens and green card carriers, but there's no question there's still several thousand Afghans who risk their lives to help the modernization process and stabilization process, and not just translators, but and they deserved special immigrant visas. And the state, there was absolutely no preparation, or next to no preparation, and all perception politics on the part of the Biden administration. Because if something goes wrong, we'll just blame the Trump administration. No, this is your call. And our allies saw it. It hurt them and seeded grave doubts about American reliability. And again, we're the stabilizer. Even some of our enemies appreciate that, even though they'd never say it. It's just known that the fact that, wait a minute, the U.S. is going to be the adult in the room. And instead, we've got a philosophy that has escaped the faculty clubs, that is that the United States is the problem. And it's become part of the guiding strategy in the current administration. And our allies see it. Jim's connection to the French Revolution and the terror after is Jim, I got to give you credit again. It's great. It's and there is some truth to it. Now, it leads in our case, given the threat I see out of China, it is that morale erosion of will to deter nuclear war. Your enemy has got to believe that you're going to fire back at him. That was the key component of stability during the Cold War. And I think there's a lot of doubts. Both here in the United States, I'm expressing it willfully, publicly, and with it's. I'm sad about this. Not only just sad about it, I am worried about it. But we've seen it from our allies, and as Jim made the joke, he says when the French are criticizing the United States for essentially cowardice, I think that would be a fair word. Cowardice, stupidity, surrender. The French accusing the United States of surrender. Okay, there's your joke, except not a joke. And I guess I'm going to end this, Dan, because I've made my point about it being scary, is that I love teasing the French, but the thing is they do a heck of a lot around the planet for stability themselves and for what remains of the free world. They really do. They're just quiet about it. And then they want to go around and say, that, we're not, go blame Washington. And the game is, as long as they're doing it and we're resolute, fine, let them say that. I wish they wouldn't, but they do. But they do a lot, just like the British do. And we have other allies that do as well. Jim and I have gone over about how much we both dislike Erdogan and what he's doing to Turkey. But if you turn around, Turkey is a problem. But Turkey is still, it's much more of an American ally than it is even with Erdogan in charge, and he won't be there forever. And I just bring Turkey up as one example. I ought to say this too, is that the Arab Gulf nations, that criticize us all the time, but now they're worried. Afghanistan seeded a lot of worry. And it's because they understand the threat that Iran represents. And they also see how Iran's radicals are selling. Iran's biggest ally right now is China. China needs Iran because it wants its oil, and it's positioned to threaten the Persian Gulf, Arabian Gulf. It's the same. But they are the Afghanistan, and also some of the unwillingness to do basic security, meet basic security needs in the United States. And I'm talking about Portland, Minneapolis, some of the Antifa actions, and also the southern border are become larger questions internationally when you see what happened with Afghanistan. So I'll leave it at that. I've see what Jim has to say.
Jim, do you have any response to Austin's?
No, he covered it pretty well. I think there's plenty of scary stuff out there, and I think we've covered the ones that we know about. Like I said, it's the ones we don't know about, don't expect. That'll be scarier still, but that's why people now go to haunted houses, to be surprised by something they didn't expect. But they don't like that in their government.
I don't like haunted houses in reality is really the thing. But you're talking about black swans, and they happen all the time. So yeah, unfortunately.
Well, I'm not going to sleep any easier this Halloween, so we'll talk to you gentlemen next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Take care.